Dr. Steve Siepser. Have sort of interesting background. I went to Tufts where I was an undergraduate and had a really great experience there. Played on the lacrosse team, had a bunch of friends, was on the ski team. Academics, well, I liked school, but I was not a high performance guy because I wasn't really paying attention. So at the end, I applied to medical school. I thought that would be good. The Vietnam War was on. So it was either that or go to war. And I'm named after my uncle who died in the Battle of the Bulge. So my dad said, we already gave, so you're not going. So medical school was a big push that year. It was the Tet Offensive, so a lot of people applied to medical school. I had pretty good grades, but I got on the wait list, and that wasn't going to keep me out of the Army. So I went to dental school. And at Tufts, I had been working with my hands. That's where I learned electron microscopy. So I was always under this biomicroscope doing fine things. I really liked it. So I got myself into dental school. My chemistry professor, I was a good student, so he got me into dental school, and I thought I'd give it a try. I like using my hands, it's dentistry. I didn't really like the feel of the whole thing. It was a little too conservative, too rigid, you know, it was going to be the same thing. So I applied to medical school at the prompting of my anatomy teacher. She said, look, I'll get you into medical school in Europe, because they had a sister school, Louvain, University Catholique in Louvain, Belgium, which is considered like the Harvard of Northern Europe. I didn't know it at the time. So she gets me in there. I go over there. I'd already studied at the Sorbonne, so I speak French fluently. And it was like a perfect match. I walked into this place. They speak French. The professors were awesome. They liked Americans because, you know, the Americans came in there and saved Belgium, Second World War, and that was still around. These folks were, you know, it was 40 years ago. So I had a great time there. I finished like 10th in my class. I graduated cum laude. But I knew that if you came back to the United States, you know, you were a foreign medical graduate, so that wasn't quite as good. So I went to medical school again, Downstate Medical Center. It was really cool. I showed up there and I said, well, I want to get a U.S. degree, but I hear you have this fifth pathway program and everything. And so I got interviewed and everything. They said, oh, look, we'd like you to sit for the final in medicine. I said, really? Yeah. So I sat for the final in medicine. I got like an 82. The head of the department called me in. He was convinced nobody could have passed that exam. And so he started quizzing me. His name was Eichmann. He starts, you know, quizzing me on all this stuff. And of course, I knew the answers. In Europe, you're always tested verbally. So all exams are oral. So, you know, it's natural, like conversational. Like you can ask me a question about medicine, I could answer it. Boom. The guy's like this. So they offered me a position in their third year class. So this is in Brooklyn. And they gave me a full scholarship. So I lived in what's called a residence quarters. I worked as an electron microscopist again. And I had another job as a triage officer in the psych ward. So it's a pretty cool place. I learned a lot. It was interesting. That's where I learned who's really healthy and who isn't, because we had these 40-bed wards. I mean, this is back in the old days. So there'd be an open ward, 40 beds. We'd have maybe 2 or 3 people on respirators. And so I could sort of tell when patients were sort of going downhill. It was a really rough place. So as soon as that year was over, I said, I love skiing. So I got myself an externship. So I went to Weintraub Hematology in Utah, where every Wednesday we all went skiing. That was great. And then I went to Denver and I did nephrology, neurology. And then I went back to Belgium and I said, you know, this school I had in Belgium, they had these final exams. So I went back and got my final MD degree from Belgium. Then I went and worked in Nairobi in Africa. That was awesome. And I was at Kenyatta National Hospital. And some of my buddies from my ski team showed up from Utah, and we went, I guess about 6 weeks, we did safari. We went camping in Goragora Canyon, these amazing places. And then after that, I had to get back to work. So I did my last year and then applied for residency. And I was thinking about orthopedics, but I had a bad experience in orthopedics as a resident and in my last year. And so I said, that's not going to work. So I'd always been sort of like a camp counselor, been a lifeguard, counseled kids. So I said, I'll become a pediatrician. So I got a residency in Albany, New York. And I liked it. It was really fun for me, taking care of the kids and everything. I ended up in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. Now in the neonatal intensive care, you have all these little peanuts, you know, they're like gonna die, or they're just like, you gotta do all this stuff to keep, and I was the guy they called in, start the IV, get this to work, and I was always like putting together things to make it work. And a friend of mine was in the ophthalmology program, Gary Levin, and Gary said, well, Steve, you know, why don't we play tennis together? So we started playing tennis together. And he had an old 240Z, one of the first Nissan Datsun, it was, I think back then, never started. It's Albany, it's raining all the time, bad weather. So I looked at his car for him, and I realized that his distributor cap had a small crack on it. There was a carbon trace on it. So I got him a new distributor cap, changed it, started all the time. He was like blown away. He says, you got to do ophthalmology. I said, what do you mean ophthalmology? I don't want to do this thing, you know, do you like one or two, you know, for the glasses? He said, no, you don't understand. You just do a rotation. So I said, all right. So I did a rotation in ophthalmology. So back in the NICU, when you had these really sick kids, the parents are like freaked out, you know, and they're like in shell shock. Their poor little baby is dying or whatever, you know, and they like, no, they weren't thankful. They were just like zombies. The grandparents, they understood. They really said, well, gee, you know, got a sick kid. Doc, you're doing a great job. Thanks for working with us. You know, you can have a conversation with them. So I go to ophthalmology. I'm in rotation there. Patients come in. They're older, right? You fix their cataracts, right? Say, thanks, doc. So it was like, those are the people I ought to fix. And not only that, it was degrees and angles. It was all the things. I'd been a sailor. I used the electron microscope. I was really used to numbers, technical things. Tufts was an engineering school. They really stressed engineering when I was there. You had to learn Fortran. I took calculus with all these engineering students. So it was sort of like my language. So when I got there, I just felt like this is the right place for me. So I told the department chair, it was a guy named Bob Reineck, say, hey Bob, look, this is really cool. I think I'm gonna stop pediatrics and do ophthalmology. He said, well, why don't you apply to Yale, and gave me a list of places. So I get accepted at Yale, but it's the following year. And I'm down at Will's interviewing, and that's here in Philadelphia, and the guy I'm interviewing with, Rob Harley, says, you know, you ought to apply up at Temple. I think there's a spot. So really? So I go up to Temple, like this is all like on the fly. And I get an interview, and they say, well, we have a spot in July. So I go back to Reineck up in Albany. I say, hey, look, they got a spot in July. It's now May, June, July. Or I wait next year, I'm at Yale. And I wasn't really happy with the program at Yale, big name program, but I didn't like the chairman too much. So he said, why don't you take the Temple spot? So I did. And Temple was perfect for me because I got there, and at that point, Temple and Wills were together, right? So I got all the didactics, all the training at Wills. We had conferences 3 days a week. You were there at 6 in the morning. But at Temple, it was like nobody cared. There was nobody there. It was either you or no one. So I got to take care of all these patients who really needed me, who I could help, and with sort of limited supervision. So I was really hitting the books and I was reading. So I was learning like what the latest thing was. I didn't have like professors down at Wills telling me, don't do this, don't do that. I was reading, and there's this guy Kelman who had invented the phacoemulsifier. And the minute I saw that thing, I said, I got to do this. And then implants were there. So here it is, 1977, and I read about these implants. So I started doing my first cataract surgeries. The first patient I did was a Russian immigrant. She had been a -12. I took out her cataract. The next day, she saw really, really well. I go, wow, this is so cool. From then on, though, every time you take out a cataract, in those days, the people wore the thick glasses, they didn't see. I said, this is really discouraging. Then these implants started coming along. So I was the first resident at Temple to do an intraocular lens implant with this guy Vacherette at Episcopal Hospital, one of our Roche. He was starting to use them. So in the beginning, you know, we were taking out the cataract. That was all the tense part, and, you know, we got it right, get the eye closed up. when we started doing implants, sort of whipped out the cataracts and say, hey, let's get this implant in there. So things progressed really quickly. So I sort of already at the cutting edge. I could use a microscope. Other guys were using loupes. So all the attendings would have me do their cataract surgery. Because I was under the microscope, it was like another day at work. For them, it's really stressful. I remember I used to go up to Jean's Hospital, a guy, Dr. Fred Sutliff, great guy, now gone. His daughter and I went to Tufts together. And he used to let me, I'd go up there and do cataract surgery for him. He'd be in the coffee lounge there with the nurses, chatting him up. And he'd always give me, he said, great job, he'd give me $100. Back then, that was a lot of money. And so about that time, I met the Frank brothers. And they had a pretty big practice in a place called Hatboro. And I had my residency. And I could really move through patients well. I just had a facility because I'd been a pediatrician. So it was like easy for me to take care of older patients. You could talk to them. It was pretty cut and dry what you had to tell them, how you got them through that. And so near the end of my residency, I'm doing a lot of cataract surgery. This phacoemulsifier comes along. Turns out Kelman, the guy who invented it, had gone to Wills, but he had gone to medical school in Belgium. And I had come across him many years before that. I didn't know how famous he was. My mother's best friend was his wife's seamstress. I grew up in a lower middle class family. My dad was a white collar worker, but we didn't have a lot of money. So I corresponded with him a lot, and I got to know him way back when, and then he shows up again on my radar. Wow, this is the guy who did. So I went up to New York and met him, and this device was, scorned, like you're going to put this vibrating thing to suck out the cataract, the size doesn't matter, and on and on. Everybody knows size matters. So I remember back in those days, my first license plate for my car was 3 mm for 3 millimeters. Everybody else is opening the eye 6 to 8, and I'm doing it through 3 millimeters. And so my patients immediately did well. I was using implants when nobody else was. And so when I started my practice, it took off. And I've had a great career ever since. Now, once you're at the leading edge of things, like you're always doing things first, a lot of doctors wait until it's proven. Well, here in the United States, by the time we get something, it's been used all over the world, it's well proven, you don't have to prove it again, it's safe, it's effective. Most of the time it's an implementation issue. So it's getting my staff educated, Nick, learning about what this technology is, evaluate, taking everybody, going and visiting a practice like Ming Wang, say, gee, what are you doing lately? Or we'll go out to, I've gone to France many times, I speak French, and watching the surgeons there because they're ahead of us. So once I put together a program, realized what we're going to do, like the raindrop. The raindrop for me was a no-brainer. I already knew hydrogels, I knew the technology. I'd actually worked on that with a guy named Ted Werblin about 40 years ago in West Virginia in a monkey colony. We were using these little pledgets, which I got made in Lancaster. I had a contact lens guys grinding them down, but the least we could get was to be about 500 microns, about a half a millimeter. And then we thought that was really thin. Well, a raindrop came along, it was 30 microns thick. It was only 2.5 millimeters across. I said, wow, this is amazing. So the mindset was already there. And adopting something new wasn't new to me. It was getting the team and understanding the technology. And that's a product that we just immediately put in. Well, is that cutting edge? Not for us really, but it is. No one else does them. And so the camera, understanding new products and developing new products, introducing them into your practice, it's like second nature. We don't have to wait for everybody else, A lot of surgeons, they wait until it's proven. Then they're always behind the curve. We're out in front of the curve, picking this or picking that. I always tell my son, one of my children is he always does the minimum. He doesn't do the extra credit. When I was a kid, I always did the extra credit and everything else. And I always say, look, and my dad was the same way. He just tried to do the minimum. He loved golf and he was a good guy, but he never really worked that hard. But I'm a hard worker. And I said, look, you got a choice, Ben. You can either bump along the bottom, or if you're bumping across the top, doing the hardest, best you can, If you fall a little bit, it's no big deal. You're still way up here. And that's sort of how I've run my career. When we try a new product, when we're developing new thoughts, we're doing new things, we're up here. We're sort of bumping across the top. We're not waiting for the minimum. Same thing with cataract surgery. A lot of times we have to introduce the idea to patients that they're not going to see like their friends after cataract surgery. Now, why is that? Well, most doctors they want to wait a little bit, wait until your cataract's ripe. Well, why do they do that? Because if you don't see anything and you do a sort of average operation, they see better. They go, wow, I can see, but they're not really seeing that well. We're starting with patients, they've had LASIK or they have a range, they've had a whole bunch of things done to see perfectly. The minute they have cataracts, their vision drops a little bit, they're in here. So we have to sort of wait and work with them till it really affects their activities of daily living. Once they are sort of bothered by this, we intervene early. So their vision drops for a few days, but we get them back better than they've ever been. That's sort of the way we do things here. We're looking for top line, best thing you can do. We're really after finding folks, like look at cars. You can buy a car for, when I was a kid, you could buy a car for a couple thousand or 5,000. Now you buy a car for 18,000 or 50,000. Now, what's the difference? Why would you pay $50,000? Like, I drive Acuras, right? I don't like, Mercedes is a nice car, but I think it's a little overpriced for what it is. And Acura is a well-made car, serviceable, doesn't have maintenance issues, right? Or you buy the cheapest thing there is, a little tinny, doesn't work well. Well, if you just sort of take the car, I used to work on cars, and you start looking at the parts of a car. The reason the Acura costs 2 or 3 times what a Ford Focus is not that it's just a markup for whatever. It's because it's easier to make a stamped part. A machine can stamp out parts, but now that part isn't nearly as strong as what's called a machine or forged part. That's like 4 or 5 times more expensive to make a forged part. So what's happened to medicine here in the United States is very interesting. I think it's great. I think everybody should get some sort of care, and I think they should have access to care. But just like you should be able to buy a car at a various price, the technology we have in ophthalmology is the same way. You can buy a Kodak lens, or you can buy a Nikon lens. Well, which one do you want in your eye? Kodak lens is serviceable for 90% of the people. But if you want to blow up the image or you want to see something really particularly well, you want a Nikon lens. And that's what's happened in cataract surgery. There's these premium services where we can use more expensive products, better services. I can spend more time with patients by tamping down volume a little bit. That's a different experience than just having another cataract. Because I used to do that. I used to do 30 operations a week. And I just got tired of it. Plus, I couldn't get to know the patients. I was using everything the least expensive I could. Because it's interesting. Insurance companies, they come to you and they tell you, the consumer, they say, we'll get you the best doctors. We'll get you the best stuff, right? Buy our program. And what do you think they do when they turn around to me? How cheap can you do it? Right? That's not really what the patient wants. And we are looking for the type of patient who wants the very best thing. And it's multiples. I mean, I always say, have you ever stayed in a Motel 6, right? It's okay, $45. Sheets are a little scratchy. You can hear a guy down the hall, but it's a great deal. Now you go and stay at the Ritz-Carlton. Is it 10 times better? I don't know. The sheets are nice and everybody says hello and the towels are fluffy and everything. But it's a value and it's perceived in the ball. The same thing should be true in medicine. If you want to buy the very best and everything, usually it does cost multiples of what the least expensive thing does. That's what's happening in medicine in the United States. It's going to spread through the system. But right now in our specialty, if somebody says, well, all right, I just take my cataracts out. Well, that should be free, right? I mean, your insurance should cover that. But then now they say, well, wait a minute. I don't want to wear glasses anymore. I want my astigmatism fixed. I don't want to wear readers or... Well, insurance isn't going to pay for that. And that's one of our issues. Patients come in the door. They're expecting their free cataract surgery, their insurance. I've got the best insurance there is. They don't. They either have the cheapest, and no insurance wants to cover something like the Ritz-Carlton, right? They'll buy you a Ford, but they're not going to buy... And there's nothing wrong with a Ford. It's a very serviceable product. I have a couple. But when I'm driving myself, I got an Acura because I just want something that's extra safe. It's got auto braking, it stays in its lane, it trails the car in front of it. It's safer, better, it's quieter. So the same thing's true in cataract surgery. I have a few minutes I can spend with a patient. We have Nick to explain everything to them, so the whole experience is better. Plus, we're using the finest products we can. The product we use most commonly, like the crystal lens, Bausch & Lomb product, that's almost 20 times more expensive than the least expensive implant. And it's sort of difficult to explain to patients the difference between a pressed part and a forged part. And it makes a difference in the results. Is it 10 times or 20 times better? No, but it's incrementally better. And is it better for everybody? That's the interesting part. It's all in the eyes of the beholder. We always tell patients, look, if you get the premium care, there's a 90% chance that you won't wear glasses for distance or near. But it's only 90%. Because that last 10%, they may see better than anyone else, but it may not be good enough for them. And so there's a lot of management of the patient's expectations and helping them be realistic about the results. Because I can't make people 21 again. I can help them see with the best potential for them. And then getting them to accept and understand that is important.